This is the Eco-Modernist Soapbox. And I have with me today an astrophysicist. His name is Al Scott. And he also has a podcast, which is very interesting. I recommend it highly, called The Rational View. Welcome to the show, Scott. Why don't you talk to us a little about your podcast to begin with?
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me on your show, Gabriel. I've seen some of your podcasts and they're really great, and I really appreciate you having me on here. So, The Rational View just started up, and it's basically providing what I see as an evidence-based perspective on important societal issues. I kind of feel like the rational people among us are somewhat disenfranchised by the polarized debate that we see on the internet. There's both ends of the spectrum, but there doesn't seem to be a very strong voice for the middle, and that's what I want to try to provide here. It's frustrating to not have that out there and have kind of a civil discourse, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's I've seen it. You're very eloquent. I must compliment you. As you know, this is the Eco-Modernist Soapbox here. So, do you know anything about eco-modernism? Have you?
So, yeah, surprisingly, I didn't know anything about it until you contacted me, Gabriel, and then I looked it up on Wikipedia and looked up your podcast, and it's like, oh, I'm an eco-modernist. So,
I knew you were an eco-modernist before you knew it.
It's true.
Thank you for spotting you guys.
Thank you for recognizing me and picking me out. I kind of feel, I'm very passionate about a lot of social issues and a lot of science, and I've been fighting against woo and anti-science sentiment, and I've seen the rise of flat earthism, and, at first I thought, oh, this isn't going to take off, but it seems to be getting worse, not better. I've been fighting on the internet, putting comments and just fighting against trolls and not getting anywhere. So I thought, I need to put something together where I can focus my thoughts and maybe get a bigger voice on the internet. So that's kind of why I did this podcast.
And then you're an astrophysicist, and that's interesting because I don't know if you've checked into it. We've done a program with Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz and with Dr. James Powell, and we spoke about Star Trek. And what they were talking about is atomic rocketry. They were talking about going into space more cheaply. Star Trek is basically like, have you ever seen the old silent movie about the cannon that shoots you to the moon?
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is, but it's electric.
And I've read some science fiction about that as well. Well, it's one of those technologies that seems feasible, right? We seem to have the technology to do it. There doesn't seem to be any showstoppers. There's a lot of different ways to get to space that people have thought about, and many of them are fiction, right? I think this one is closer to reality than many of them. Also, the space elevator. I think that one is further to the realm of fiction at this point because they don't have the materials that are strong enough to hold that, and it's huge, right? It's just crazy. This Star Trek, but it just aims up into space and goes really, really fast in a vacuum, and then boom. Now, it's much easier to do this with unmanned cargo, shall we say.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can give it a high G-force boost in a small tube and get it shooting out there, and it can come out with a sonic boom, and there's nobody inside the rocket. If you want to make it work for people, you got to stretch out that acceleration, and you need a maybe 100-kilometer of acceleration so that it's smooth enough to get up. So it actually makes it a lot harder to get people into space.
There's an iteration that I saw of this design, which was the ship goes around faster and faster, and then it hits a certain point where...
Oh, yeah. I've seen something like that. It's a huge price tag. It's probably more than it costs to build a new rocket.
Yeah, the estimates that Dr. Powell gave were pretty reasonable, actually, when you consider the federal budget. And so I wanted to, going from that point and just assuming that we could launch pretty cheaply into space, and the way robotics is going with everything, how does it look as far as mining space, mining asteroids or colonizing the moon? How do you feel about all of that?
it's been a long road. I mean, I've been a child of the space age, and we had this great start with Apollo, and then we got this disappointment with the space shuttle and the International Space Station, which was kind of a treading water thing to keep international cooperation going. But now there's more interest to get back to the moon where we were 50 years ago, redo our initial steps, and it's all driven by politics, unfortunately. But I think the entrance of commercial suppliers like SpaceX into the market is very positive for space travel and bringing down the cost of space travel and doing it as a commodity. Now we've gone beyond the Orville and Wilbur Wright part of space, and now we're getting into maybe the jets portion where you actually have passengers, and it's not just a government run thing. So I think that's very good. Now, space mining, this is one of the ways where you can monetize space. People think that this is what's going to drive the development of low-cost launch services. You need to find something to make money in space that will bring in commercial competition to space and bring down all the prices. So people are looking for this. And space mining, it's still out there a ways, I think. People have looked at metal asteroids, and the sort of value of rare earth minerals and gold and platinum in these things is huge. Trillions of dollars in a small asteroid, and people want to go out and bring all of this back. But think about the difficulty of bringing this back to the market, right? It costs right now about $10,000 a kilogram to send stuff into space. And this is on an unmanned mission. Think about if you put a manned mission up there, it's about 10 times more.
Yeah, I realized that. I mean, you'd have to bring down the price tremendously. Perhaps that's where Star Trim could come in.
Yeah, if you get something that's reproducible like that and that sends it up, then you could envision it. I mean, right now, I think the value of gold is something like $57,000 a kilogram, and if it costs anywhere close to $100,000 to bring the equipment up there and bring it back, you're not going to make money. And if you do bring back a whole lot of it and flood the market, then the price will go down. It's not going to be worth much anymore.
To my mind, we really need to map out what's out there, not only just for mining purposes, but just to protect ourselves. And you could tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems like one thing goes with the other.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of concepts for monetizing space. There's also concepts for generating energy, putting solar panels up in space and then beaming it down with microwaves, right? I've seen some interesting concepts from that. NASA's had studies on that. And colonization, I've been very interested in space colonization, and a habitable base on the moon is something that I've worked at with some researchers looking at some of the technologies you need. And in fact, a lot of the things you need to go into space are kind of one-time use stuff, right? You're spending a lot of time just to get through the environment of space with your toys. But there is parts of the human experiment in space that's very useful to us as a species here on Earth. And part of that is living in space. And the thing that I latched onto is very interesting is bioregenerative life support systems.
What is that?
It's basically growing food in space. If you've watched The Martian, you grow your own food, they produce oxygen, they take down carbon dioxide, and you basically build yourself an enclosed ecosystem, like the biosphere people were trying to do. And the research that goes into this is very useful for us on Earth because we don't know scientifically what the minimum closed ecosystem is. And the research that you need to build a sustainable habitat on a different planet that doesn't need to be resupplied from Earth with food, which is the main thing that you can't do in space right now, is have a sustainable food supply.
They built a habitat on Earth that they tried to seal off and have humans in it and grow food and all of that, and it was a disaster.
That's the biosphere.
They couldn't do it. I mean, have they mastered that at all, or is it we're in the same space?
It's an unfinished question. So There have been various agency level experiments to try to close the loop. The European Space Agency has something called Melissa, and they try to close the loop. And basically, they can close it about 70%. So it's not nearly enough. They still need certain nutrients that they run out of and they can't recycle. We do it on Earth here all the time. The Earth recycles all of our nutrients somehow. There's the right microbe mix and enough of a reservoir that everything will turn over eventually. But we don't know what the carrying capacity is. And this work that you do to define an enclosed ecosystem gives you both low resource agriculture spin-offs for Earth using like low energy LEDs, hydroponics with nutrient control, all of these things, and then recycling your poop and all of your waste products and closing that loop. It's something that we don't know how to do yet.
Well, to me, the $64,000 question is gravity. Could man, even on Mars, could man survive? Could the human body sustain itself in that low gravity?
There's definitely problems with zero G, like microgravity in the ISS. People have had eye problems, and your eyes start doing strange things, and your bones will basically dissolve themselves because your bones basically build themselves up based on the stresses that they encounter from your environment. So I think Mars is reasonably close. I mean, it's a third, something like that, Earth gravity. Don't quote me on that, but I think you could probably adapt to Mars without too much difficulty. The moon, probably you could live long term there. It'd be a bigger adaptation, obviously. But zero gravity is really the problem. And people have talked about the transit time and the radiation risk. You're getting a pretty strong dose of radiation. If you go a full 2-year mission to Mars and back, you're looking at getting like a overall like a 1 sievert dose, which was pretty significant.
You need an atomic rocket. You need technology that doesn't exist right now, actually. I mean, right?
I think the radiation question is unanswered. I think there's a lot of people on both sides of the issue, and I'm going to be looking at a podcast looking at the risks of radiation soon. But there's a lot of research on hormesis, which basically says that a little bit of radiation actually helps the body, as it activates repair mechanisms, and each person has a different level where that's a problem. And then you get to the high level where there's a lot of radiation can increase your cancer risk. But if you're not getting radiation sick, the details of what your radiation or your cancer risk is are very small in most cases.
The reason why I mentioned atomic rocket is to avoid the radiation, because you're accelerating the speed you're traveling in space and really cutting down the time.
Yeah, it's like a few months instead of years.
Yeah, from what I understand, I think the problem with the atomic rocket is that because all the shielding, the weight of the rocket itself, it's not dangerous. It's just, it's not there. At least that's from what I understand. You know, I did a podcast on that with, that was the podcast I was mentioning, Space, which I don't even, it's good to check out, you know, I mean, even for someone on your level, because it's, I mean, Dr. Franklin Chang Diaz and Dr. Powell are just amazing, you know.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to go take a look at that. That sounds interesting.
There's another way to go, and that's robotics.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, maybe robots could one day do pretty much all of it.
I think if you're doing science, robotics is definitely the way to go. It's much less expensive. You're talking about an order of magnitude cheaper to do the same work with a robot than you would with a human. I don't think science justifies manned exploration. I think manned exploration stands on its own as something that humanity wants to do for colonization, for spreading out into the galaxy, or at least into the solar system. But I think we've had problems before when the manned program has been justified on the back of science. And it's when the International Space Station was built, they basically raided science coffers to build this big station in space. But the science output of the International Space Station is definitely not worth the investment if you're justifying on the sole basis of science. The real success of the International Space Station was international cooperation and inspiration. There's inspiration getting kids into STEM fields when you have people going to space. You know, you look at Chris Hadfield up in the ISS, really inspirational stuff. But it's difficult to do cutting edge science on the ISS.
I'm very pro space program, but to me, if I was the president, I'd be very pragmatic about it. I would say, instead of concerning ourselves with finding out what's on Jupiter and this and that, I'd spend the money on like working on the Star Trek, working on atomic rocketry, working on plasma rocketry, working on the robotics end of it, and working also internationally with other countries to get them to work together on this stuff so that we could take a leap. Because ultimately, and I don't know how long the timeline is, I think that with the problems of resource scarcity, ultimately moving into space is the solution. It's a long-term thing, but the sooner we do it, the better.
Yeah, there's really two potential trajectories, I think, for civilization. And one is to expand outward, and the other is to stay here. I think in either case, space isn't going to be a solution for many problems here on Earth. I kind of feel like at the end of the Roman Empire, when they had all this lead in their pipes, was making them a little bit crazy, and their civilization collapsed, right? And we've got this same thing. We've got this buildup of carbon dioxide, and it's been shown that CO2, as it increases, decreases your IQ.
That's true.
So I see a definite correlation here as to what's going on in, in the 21st century.
The sea level rises might be the worst thing.
That's definitely going to be a problem for anyone.
So, I mean, it's just a plethora of problems. The long and the short of it is that we need an exponential growth in the advancement of science. And we're learning this from the coronavirus. I mean, God, it's just disgraceful that we have gotten to this point, because we've known this was going to happen. And yet that they've thrown crumbs to the medical community in terms of researching on a virus. They should have been working on a virus vaccine for this 10 years ago. God knows how long ago.
Yeah, and I think there was some research, but it certainly wasn't funded to the level that obviously in retrospect we would have liked.
Do you remember the movie with Dustin Hoffman? I don't know if you saw it, Outbreak, I think it was called. It was like in the 80s. It was like a big movie. But when that movie came out, they said that the amount of money they spent on research for pandemics is less than what they spent on the movie.
That's a common problem, and one that I kind of want to address to a certain extent in my podcast as well, is rational public spending on risk and prevention. And I think in a lot of cases, people just aren't good at spending any significant sum to prevent something that can be foreseen. And they're happy to go about their daily lives doing their utmost to exploit the tragedy of the commons and then be forced to deal with the collapse of the commons later. There's so much evidence of this happening in the past. Like, you look at the Grand Banks cod fishery collapse, and go back to the passenger pigeon and the bison, and there's just these obvious things that people are saying maybe we shouldn't be doing this so much, but until it goes away, nobody does anything.
It's so true. You know what gets me is that we spent so much money to protect the United States, and there isn't a nation on earth that could really do anything to us. But a little virus gets us, and we've done nothing to protect ourselves. And you know what else I look at? And this is an intersection: deforestation. It seems like we really have to look more seriously about stopping it, because it's not a climate issue alone anymore. It's a disease issue. And I hope that we're going to be looking at things much more seriously.
And the loss of ecological diversity as well is stunning, right?
That's connected as well. Bushmeat. Yeah.
I've got a long list of things that I want to address in my podcast, and it's hard to pick and choose because there's so much out there that's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've checked all your podcasts out. You keep up the good work.
I enjoy, educating people and doing outreach, and I think it needs to be done more because there's organized forces trying to muddy the waters out there in a lot of issues, and unless we fight back with rational facts and evidence and approaching the people that have been hoodwinked. I mean, a lot of people get into this yelling match against the other side, tribalism, and these people aren't stupid people. These are people that don't have time to research it or don't have the necessary background to understand the issues, and they're trusting their leaders, and their leaders are not all good people, I think.
That's right.
And I think we have to reach out to these people very carefully.
Even scientists could get so wrapped up in their particular specialty. I know scientists who are anti-nuclear, and I know that they must not really understand it. It's like, man, what they know is beyond anything that I understand. They're way smarter than me. But the thing is, they're so specialized, though.
It's very easy to fool yourself and let your emotions bias you. And it's very difficult to question something that aligns with your pre-existing beliefs when you see it. And that you really have to make an effort. I have to do it too. Very easy to get pulled in. And it's like, wait a minute, maybe I should check the facts. Maybe I should check the sources. Maybe I should go back and just make sure.
None of us, nobody wants to say that they're wrong about anything. Nobody likes that. It's not a good feeling. But it's better to view life as a mystery. I think it makes my life more exciting than just to assume that you know everything. Because then you go, oh, wow.
Yes.
Rather than down. I got this covered. Because nobody does.
It's much better to admit ignorance than to have answers that are wrong, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, it's been really nice. I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank our viewers, too.
Thank you very much.
Stay well, and we'll be seeing you till next time.